Hello, everyone. We're going to give everyone a minute here to join the webinar. We see you're coming into the room today. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. We've got another minute here to go, so we'll give folks a little more time to pour into the room before we get started. All right. It's 12 noon here in the East Coast of the United States, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to this research update, and thank you all for coming. We are going to give an update related to the CRB1-associated retinal dystrophy. Excuse me, my name is Laura Manfrey, and I'm a co-founder and board chair of Sophia Sees Hope. I'm also a director on the board of the Foundation Fighting Blindness. And for those of you who don't know Sophia Sees Hope, we are a 501c3 dedicated to supporting the LCA community. So we support all those in the LCA community, regardless of genetic variant, as well as those who are not diagnosed. We raise funds to support the research and help advance the research there. We do that in partnership with the Foundation Fighting Blindness. And we also raise funds to support my retina tracker. Other activities that we do include outreach, support, and education. And an example of some of these are our Family Connections program, where we connect individuals and families with one another to provide support. We have an ambassador program that really help us to scale and reach communities globally. We have a Seeing Hope newsletter you can sign up for on our website, and we mail that around the world. There's also a digital format there. Right now, this year, something new, we have the Let's Chat About monthly webinar series. So once a month, we cover a different topic in research or advances, regulatory, etc. We have hosted 2 family conferences to date. Obviously, those are on hold for the time being, but we hope to be back in person sometime soon. And then, of course, we're always sharing patient stories and resources. So we'd love to hear from you in the community so we can share your stories as well. We do a lot of other work with legislation and policy and partnering with other rare IRD organizations and awareness campaigns and events. So that's a little bit about me and Sophia Sees Hope and some business here, just some housekeeping. This is a webinar format, so your cameras are disabled. You'll only be viewing the presenters while we're speaking and our slides. Microphones are also muted. If you do wish to ask questions, which we hope you do ask questions, please you can use the question manager, and that is located at the bottom of the Zoom control bar. You can type your questions in there. You may also ask questions verbally. So to do that, you can use the raise your hand function at the menu bar, and we'll provide you with instructions then to unmute yourself. If you're dialing in from the phone, you can dial 9 to raise your hand. And again, if you're on the phone, then you can hit #9 to raise your hand or #6 then to unmute yourself. And last comment here under housekeeping is that this session is being recorded. So we will be distributing this and sharing this with everyone on the call today. So this brings us to why we're here today and what we hope to accomplish. So our objective for the next hour is to engage you, the CRB1 community, as we seek to advance treatment for ourselves and our loved ones. And we're going to begin by walking you through a background of the Scientific Advancement Workshop, which was held just about 1 week ago. Then we're also going to share some data from the State of the Community survey. And that's data that we collected from you. Hopefully many of you were able to participate, and if not, we are keeping that survey open. And then we're going to share some research highlights and of course have ample time for questions and answers before closing. A little bit more about what to expect. So I know this is very emotional. I also have a child with LCA. So I just want to, make sure we're setting expectations here for the next hour, because I know we all come with a lot of hope and desire to see, find out what's happening with treatments, right? So what you can expect from today are the highlights from the scientific workshop last week, a summary of the research, and really an opportunity to be heard to ask your questions, right? What not to expect, I think, is a deep dive into the science, and any easy answers or quick solutions. There's no direct path here. In fact, for CRB1 in particular, the biology here is very, very complex, right? So there may be multiple paths, and there's not necessarily a straightforward answer. But what is really, really exciting is the news that we're going to share, and the collaboration we're really seeing happen now. So that leads me into the Scientific Advancement Workshop. The workshop took place last week on the 9th. It was a 5-hour virtual workshop where we gathered together the academic researchers and let them to share their information with the objective of identifying actionable steps to advance the development of treatments for those living with CRB1-associated retinal disease, right? So during the workshop, we did share the research and the patient perspectives, which we'll share with you today as well. We created a forum for them to ask questions, and we also asked them to help identify gaps and next steps to advance treatment for this patient community. And I have a photo here on the slide, a celebration photo. It's a young woman hitting a piñata. And the exciting, bit about this, really what I want to communicate here is just how much of a celebration it is that we had the workshop. We gathered over 40 of the leading experts into one room. They all came, they showed up. There was really, really great discussion. It served to broaden the circle of research awareness, right? It built a platform for knowledge sharing, and we really saw, collaboration amongst all of these folks who are into the deep, deep science, right? The other piece that I think is really, really important is that with the community survey and the information that we shared, we were also able to demonstrate that there is an engaged community here. And that's really, really important to show back to research and to show back to industry that there is an engaged and active and informed community here ready to receive the treatments that we hope will be soon. So the other things that you'll hear today are that we identified some gaps and some next steps and priority items. So that is a work in progress, as you'll hear in a little bit, right? There's no simple, straightforward answer here, but the really, really good news in the celebration here is that this was one more step ahead in bringing the right people and all the very smart people into the room, which was really, really exciting. So with all that said, I'm going to introduce a very smart person next. Todd Durham, and he will tell us a little bit about himself and the foundation, and then walk us through the community survey.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. My name is Todd Durham. I'm the Vice President of Clinical and Outcomes Research at the Foundation Fighting Blindness, one of the organizers of this workshop. Let me tell you a little bit about the Foundation Fighting Blindness. We are also a 501c3 nonprofit organization here in the United States. Our mission is to drive the research that would lead to preventions, treatments, and vision restoration for the degenerative retinal diseases, including macular degeneration, retinitis pigmentosa, and Usher syndrome, that together affect more than 10 million Americans and millions more throughout the world. Our organization was founded in 1971. We're celebrating our 50-year anniversary this year, and today we're the leading private funder of retinal disease research. As Laura alluded to, one of the great aspects of the workshop that we held last week was to share the perspectives of affected individuals and their families with the researchers who were there. And for that, we implemented a survey, and many of you likely responded to this survey. So since this is the information we shared with the researchers last week, I want to share it with you today. What we did is develop a survey. We implemented it in the SurveyMonkey program. We recruited for it through My Retina Tracker Registry, which is a program I'm responsible for. And we also ask associated groups to circulate the link to the survey in their networks, so we had a broad representation. Unfortunately, for timing purposes, the survey was only in English. I understand and really appreciate that there is a Spanish community who's really engaged in the CRB1 community. If you have the opportunity to collate stories or your narratives about your experience with CRB1, please do circulate those to representatives of your community, and I will be happy to have those professionally translated for inclusion in the final report for the workshop. The survey had 55 total respondents, individuals to complete the survey. Among these were 21 caregivers and 34 individuals themselves living with CRB1. In total, there were 62 individuals who were affected with CRB1 because we had 7 families who had 2 affected individuals. And thank you so much for everyone who have a profile in My Retina Tracker registry. 47 of the 55 respondents have a profile in My Retina Tracker registry. So thank you very much for the support of that program. One of the sets of questions we asked about was the diagnostic journey. One question we asked was, what age was the affected individual first diagnosed clinically? And on this slide is a table that shows some simple summary statistics. The average age of the clinical diagnosis was 13, and the median was 7. We also asked, what age was the affected individual first diagnosed genetically? And here the average age was 24 years and the median was 15. So there's can be a fairly significant gap between the clinical diagnosis and the genetic confirmation of it. One question that we asked also was about the current best corrected visual acuity of the affected individual. Of those respondents who completed this question, the most common category was light perception or no light perception, 14 out of the total number of individuals who responded to this question in the survey. We also asked about the presence of visual symptoms. I'm showing a slide here that is a stacked bar chart that adds up to 100%. The categories for the severity of each of the visual symptoms were NA or none, mild, medium, or severe. The percentage of individuals for which the visual symptom is not present or not applicable is represented in the gray bar, mild in blue, medium in yellow, and severe in orange. What you see on the left-hand side is the symptom of nystagmus. And this graph shows that approximately 50% of respondents said this symptom is not present for them. And in the orange bar for nystagmus, there is approximately 20% of individuals who said they have severe nystagmus. When you contrast the nystagmus bar with the one on the far right, poor visual acuity, you can see that approximately 50% of individuals had severe poor visual acuity. An additional 30% had medium or moderate poor visual acuity, and the remainder had mild or not applicable. We ask about other related conditions. Are there other symptoms or physical health conditions, eye-related or otherwise, that are related to the individual's diagnosed genetic variant? 51 individuals had no response to this question, but there were 5 respondents who said headaches or migraines were associated with their condition, and 2 individuals with distorted vision. And there were a handful of other individual responses, like for which one person responded, including anxiety, cataracts, dizziness, floaters, macular edema, mild hearing loss, and photophobia. Another question in the survey is to think about your or the affected individual's condition. What worries you the most? 19 individuals responded that progression to blindness was their biggest worry. 5 said employment or finding or keeping their job of choice. 3, accidental injury or safety, and 3 others, healing. And 3 also expressed a worry that no treatment was available. And there were a handful of other responses to this question as well. We ask about to reflect on the impact of CRB1 on your family overall, not just the affected individual. And on this slide are 5 text bubbles that are word for word the voices expressed by the respondents to the survey question. And I'll just read a few. One says, a continuous challenge to surpass all the obstacles and to be integrated. Another says, I think about the job opportunities that I might have had if I could travel further. I think about how I could take up different hobbies. I feel like my vision definitely impacts the opportunities of my children too. They are forced to grow up differently than children of sighted parents who can easily drive their children to appointments or lessons, school or wherever. It limits the activities I can engage in with my children too. My son loves to play video games, but there are very few I can play at this point. And a third person said, I can't cook, drive, I can't help my husband and children with their daily tasks, sometimes feel depressed. When we engage with individuals and families about new research, we'd also like to gauge their interest, enthusiasm, and questions about participating in clinical trials. After all, this is all related to our mission at the Foundation. So we ask, would you consider participating in or supporting your family members' participation in a clinical trial to treat your form of blindness? 39 respondents said yes. 3 said they were unsure at one time, and 1 individual said no. Then we followed up with what are the top 1 to 3 questions you have about being in a trial? And then what additional information would you need or want to know before participating? 19 individuals said they would be concerned about or want to know more about the general risks. For example, is it safe? 14 said they would be concerned and want to know more about the risks to their remaining vision. 11 would like to know about the potential for benefit from this treatment. 8 about the time commitment. 7 about how to travel for participation in the clinical trial. And then other responses like the cost to participating. We also ask a question about what are your motivations for participating in a clinical trial? And on this slide is another series of text bubbles, also in your own words. I'll just read just a handful of these. One person listed 3. 1, return of peripheral vision. 2, better central vision. And 3, more confidence. Another person said, helping others, improving my own vision. And another says, cure the disease, have a more comfortable life, not feel different from the rest because of your visual impairment. So this is just one small sample of the responses to this particular question. And a common theme throughout is not only concern about improving one's own vision, but also concern and desire to help others through research. And the last slide I will share from the survey is just a sample of responses to the question about, is there anything else that you would like to share with the researchers on the occasion of the Scientific Advancement Workshop? Again, I'll just read a sample of these, and these slides will be available for your viewing later. One says, I feel like the mental health impacts of disability are overlooked a lot of the time. I hope that research into CRB1-associated inherited retinal diseases continues to grow. And then lastly, the third one here, I realize 31 is a bit old to expect an effective restoration of vision. However, I would happily forfeit the vision I have for a shot at stability or improvement, even if the chance is not good. I'm losing it anyway, so I might as well at worst help the scientific community by showing what doesn't work. And best case, some vision is restored. I call that a win-win. Again, I would like to thank everyone for their participation and responses in this survey. Survey link we will keep open through the end of February, a week from today. So if you have not responded to the survey and would like to, please do complete that, and I will be sure to make sure your responses are tabulated in the final report. And with that, I will now turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Amy Laster.
Thanks, Todd. Good day, everyone. Again, I am Amy Laster, the Vice President of Science and Awards Program with the Foundation Fighting Blindness. And today I want to just give some research highlights of the scientific workshop from last week. It was, as Laura has already indicated, was a very robust discussion of a lot of experts. There was a scientific presentation. And so I just want to share with you some of those key highlights. We can advance to the next slide. Thank you. So on this slide, it's a text-based graphic depicting the development path from research to cure. As we begin to kind of think about achieving therapies for CRB1, there is a development pipeline that begins with first understanding the gene and the pathological or disease-causing mutations or variants. And that's over on the blue side of the graphic, starting with under basic research. From here, we can assess the impact on the associated proteins. CRB and CRB have lots of interacting proteins, as well as their functions individually, as well as how they function collectively within the photoreceptors and retinal cells. This will allow us to establish fundamental knowledge that helps in our understanding of the disease, to develop disease models or have an appreciation of the disease models that will be needed for further understanding. It begins to give us a sense of the course of disease and potential ways to treat disease. For CRB1, the state of the research in this area is very much at the stage of understanding biology of the disease, which is depicted in the orange segment of this graphic. Last week, we heard from Dr. Jeremy Kay that he and his colleagues have recently characterized a new isoform of CRB1 called CRB1-B. This isoform is interesting because it's more abundant in human and mouse retinas than the first identified isoform, CRB1A. And unlike CRB1A, the removal of the CRB1B, it causes a retinal degeneration in mice. And this has not been shown before with the first identified isoform. Also, the proteins that are expressed by CRB1, they're important for the structure and the strength of the outer limiting membrane. And this is important to keep the photoreceptors and the Mueller glia cells in the correct location in the retina. So although the research by Dr. Kay and colleagues point to a significant role of CRB1B in causing retinal degeneration, it's not yet clear whether CRB1A or CRB1B, or perhaps it's the both, should be the target of a therapy. So a lot of work from Professor Winslow really drove our understanding of CRB1 for a number of years now. So as the field learns more about the mechanism of disease, this knowledge will continue to advance towards translating the laboratory-based research into clinical trials for patients, but first by designing the clinical trials for target patient populations. To date, clinical cohort studies, and this was another component of last week's workshop on CRB mutations, show that there is a lot of variability in the clinical manifestation of CRB1 associated disease, in that, it's shown that it could cause LCA, early onset RP, and various other disease. And basically what this means is that it's difficult to determine at this point who might best benefit from any particular therapy. So additional work to understand the relationship between genotype and clinical phenotype will be important for identifying relevant endpoints and outcomes to measure any treatment efficacy. Very encouragingly, Dr. Jackie Duncan, many of you have probably met her or know her from different meetings and presentations, either through Sophia Sees Hope or the foundation. She has a clinical cohort of CRB1 affected individuals and have certainly expressed interest in pursuing further understanding the relationship between genotype phenotype, and we are in talks with her in regards to this. While we are aware that Horama Therapeutics licensed a therapeutic program from Professor Winshold to further develop a gene therapy strategy, there haven't been any updates on the status of this program. So nothing more I can say about that. And in conclusion, the foundation, I think it's important to say, will continue to do all that we can to keep advancing the research in this area, as well as any clinical development, including supporting natural history studies to address the clinical variability, which was pointed out as one of the gaps. So with that, I think we should open the floor for any questions. And I'll let Laura or Leila remind everyone how to ask questions.
Sure. If you're on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and then *6 to unmute or re-mute yourself. Everybody else can click raise your hand. We have one person with their hand up. Let me allow them to talk. Okay. Nikhil, you can unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, the question I have is that, not that I'm expert in any of these gene therapies or gene trials, but how does this connected with some of this work with RP? Because our son has the RP, and that's where this gene was first diagnosed. I'm hearing is that there are other disease maybe connected, rare disease, but how is this connected to RP?
So thank you for that question. So again, this goes to retinal degeneration. So in the case of retinitis pigmentosa, many of the genetic causing mutations or variants will result in loss of peripheral vision, and so oftentimes night blindness. And while there are various stage of diagnoses, typically it's in the second decade of life, whereas with LCA, this is a genetic condition in which either at birth or shortly thereafter, then there is the progressive loss of vision. So in terms of correlating, they are both diseases that affect the photoreceptor and the health of our sight-seeing photoreceptors. So whether it's our cone cells or our rod cells, and both are progressive diseases.
Okay. We have one question in the chat box. Have animal trials begun for CRB1A or CRB1B?
No.
Okay. And then we have a hand raised from Carolyn Fogg. Let me allow you to talk, Carolyn.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Hi.
A question. Hi, Carolyn.
Hi. So I didn't fully understand the last slide. You said that you'd identified some gaps. Is that gaps in research? And if so, I don't think I've fully understood what the gaps were.
Okay. Thank you. So yes, so based on the conversations from last week, it was to think about in the research, what are the things that we know? What are the things we don't know? And so how can the field direct its research efforts? And so part of it is understanding the mechanism of disease. So with CRB1, there are multiple isoforms that are expressed in different cells of the retina. So having a better understanding of those different isoforms and the expression patterns, that's one area of research that needs to be furthered. Additionally, it is the clinical variability, right? So really being able to understand that, you know, if you have CRB variants and these are your clinical phenotypes, but someone else with that same variant has a different clinical phenotype, why? So how can we begin to correlate that? And so having something like a natural history study, which does not exist, that would be one way to address that and to fill that gap.
Okay, we have a question from Joe. Is CRB1 a less common gene mutation than most other IRD?
It is a rare, I guess when we say other IRDs, it's a pretty, I'm just kind of thinking about the epidemiology of it, and I have to go back to get the percentage of all LCA, and I think I might be able to pull that up really quickly on this in order for you to know. So LCA in general, which accounts for about 10 to 13% of our population worldwide. So mutations in CRB1 generally accounts for about 3% of the patients worldwide. So in terms of rarity, it's very similar to IRD, as they all are rare diseases, but that is where CRB1 specifically falls.
Okay, we have a quick follow-up question. How many phenotypes have been identified for CRB?
I don't have the number of phenotypes. So when we say phenotypes, you know, there are certain features within the retina that differs, but it certainly is like more than 10 different phenotypes that the clinical cohorts have consistently described in their CRB patients.
Okay, and then we have a couple hands raised. Caroline, I'm gonna let you speak again.
Hi. So from the workshop last week, was there any research that has triggered, or is there any leads to kind of follow up from that?
The one thing that was particularly encouraging is that the research is ongoing. So we didn't hear that we did this is what we got, and here it is. What we heard is we are continuing to delve into this. We're continuing to work with collaborators. As Laura mentioned, in the conversations, there were collaborations of investigators saying, I'll be in touch with you. I have this, let's talk about this. So there's certainly momentum that the research is actively happening and that the community want to address outstanding issues. And that's on the research side. As I mentioned before, on the clinical side, in terms of actually conducting a natural history study, there was a lot of enthusiasm about that. Again, the foundation is in touch with Dr. Jackie Duncan about potentially moving forward with that. Does that address your question, Carolyn? I hope so.
Okay, we have another raised hand from Denise. Let me allow you to talk. Go ahead.
Oh. Hello. This is probably quite a general question, actually, but our little boy is 8 and he was diagnosed when he was 1. He was diagnosed genetically and sort of through clinical examination almost consecutively. He was just 1 when he was diagnosed. We've had very sketchy information about, I mean, the first I really heard about LCA was when I joined the Facebook group that Caroline added me to. We believed it was RP. I have the same condition. It's a recessive form of whatever it is. It's on the CRB1 gene. we're floundering a bit. We don't know which bus we're getting on, you know, because if there is research, we don't know which direction to look in. He has all the classic sort of CRB1 traits, whereas he's losing his central vision and is retaining a little bit of light perception in his peripheral vision. But we're more confused than anything, really, if I'm honest. Where do we go? Who do we see?
So certainly being in touch with a retinal specialist would be the best thing that I can offer you in terms of where to go. So, you know, to have a retinal specialist, particularly in inherited retinal diseases, that would then allow you to specifically ask questions and get the answers in the context of your specific case.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have a question in the Q&A. Is the best place to keep informed about possible clinical trials my retina tracker?
I'll let you answer that, Todd.
Okay, thanks for the question about that. Yeah, I wish this one had the best answer to this question is there are multiple places to find out about clinical trials that are going on. My Retina Tracker Registry is a great source. When companies ask us to help them recruit for their clinical trials, we will inform individuals who may be qualified for those. Now, that doesn't happen with every clinical trial. Sometimes companies recruit through their own means. So another source of information would be clinicaltrials.gov if you're here in the US, and there are other registries in Europe and in the UK that you could consult about which clinical trials are ongoing that may be of interest to you. Here in the US, we recommend that folks make sure that any clinical trial for a condition they're interested in is being done covered by with regulatory oversight. And you can find some information about that in the clinicaltrials.gov listing. We're aware sometimes there are studies of, say, stem cells and things like that, which we don't view as valid or legitimate research studies. So you do have to do a little bit of research. And also, last piece of advice is please do involve your ophthalmologist when asking about appropriateness of various clinical trials, because they are also there as a resource for you and it can help guide you about that.
We have a question from. Sorry, go ahead, Amy.
No, I was going to circle back to Nicole's question specifically on phenotype. I just wanted to clarify that for you. So when you have a genetic test and you may have a genetic diagnosis that says that this particular gene has a pathological variant that's responsible for the disease. If you were to see an optometrist, ophthalmologist, retinal specialist, then you would come away from that with a characteristics of what that disease looks like. For example, it may be about the thickness of the retina, which is very common in CRB1 mutations. It may be that you have nystagmus, or it may be the fact that you may have your peripheral vision is smaller. So it's actually the clinical characteristics of the disease are your phenotypes. So they go hand in hand. In some cases, you might have a gene variant that consistently results in the same clinical phenotypes, no matter who has it, right? In the case of CRB1, and it's not exclusive, there's many other genetic diseases that results in this, where you could have a genetic variant, and then you might have, my vision is haven't progressed in 3 years. Someone else with that exact same genotype may not have had that clinical experience or phenotype. So that's a variability between the two. And so having an understanding, I think, that just helps in terms of thinking about who's, what treatment is best for which population, or segmenting the population to say that those that experience, these particular phenotypes might benefit from this treatment, or vice, or otherwise.
Okay. We have a question from Courtney. It says, I have cone rod dystrophy with 2 heterozygote variants on the CRB1 gene and ABCA4. Is it possible to pinpoint what exactly is causing the cone to deteriorate faster than the rod? And is there research being done with patients with more than 1 gene mutation / variant?
Yeah, so that kind of goes back, to the initial question of working with a retinal specialist, and working with a genetic counselor in terms of understanding those gene variants, the genotype, and then what's actually happening, the phenotype.
Okay. We have a question from Sandy. What's going on with CRB1 RP trials, especially stem cell therapy?
I am not aware of any CRB1 RP trials.
We have a question from the chat. How much funding is being put towards CRB research annually? And where is most of the funding coming from?
I'm going to take I'm going to assume that this is maybe speaking from the foundation's perspective, in terms of what is, and the number in terms of specifically towards CRB research. I don't have that number off the top of my head. What I can say is that we are supporting researchers on CRB1. Also, our RD fund have activity to support CRB1. So the foundation is actively supporting researchers that is working on CRB1 and CRB1 related research and clinical trials as well.
Okay, we have a follow-up
Or
question.
clinical studies, sorry.
Have animal trials begun for CRB1A or CRB1B?
I am not aware of, besides the work that has been done by both in Dr. Winshol's laboratory, where he has looked at doing gene therapies in animal models, mouse models. And as I said, that particular program was in license to Harama Therapeutics. So beyond that, then I don't have any further information on those studies. But those studies have been done and have been published, suggesting that the gene therapy would be a strategy for CRB1 treatment.
Thank you, Amy. There is a hand raised from Joseph Smith. I'm going to click allow to talk, and you can unmute and speak now.
I'd like to know exactly what is a natural history study and how are they conducted?
Cool. Todd, you want to
Sure.
take that one?
The best way to think about a natural history study is to think about a study where you observe the features, clinical features of a person with a condition in the absence of any treatment. So in this case, there isn't a treatment available for CRB1. So what we would like to understand is, what is the retinal architecture and structure look like in someone who has CRB1? What is their visual function using all kinds of clinical exams and tests that we might do? How sensitive is their retina? How is their peripheral vision? We can do the design of these studies can be done all kinds of ways. You could find a cohort of people today and look back in their medical charts and collect data that way. One of the downsides for doing something like that is The exams themselves, when your provider does the clinical exams at the ophthalmologist office, they're not necessarily doing precise measurements. They are doing the exams to see how you're doing in general, whereas in research, we want a really accurate view as much as possible. So we tend to when we can, do studies in either in a cross-sectional sense, which is, find a cohort of individuals with CRB1 and do the series of these exams using the same processes, the same equipment, same protocols, so they have a really good idea of to get a snapshot of a collection of people using the same methodology. And that can help us understand what outcome measures we might be using when a therapy comes along to study in a clinical trial. And then the types of studies that we have been doing at the foundation to date are prospective. That means looking forward. So we'll enroll a cohort. We have a study now going in EYS related retinal dystrophy. We're following 100 people for 4 years doing the entire slate of clinical exams. And there the purpose is to see how rapidly does the disease progress when you look at, say, visual fields, at central visual acuity, at macular sensitivity, with the hope that, and with the objective of saying, this is an outcome measure that progresses at an average rate of, say, X% over 4 years, or Y% over 2 years. And so what you're hoping to find is there's an outcome measure that will help you show a difference between what naturally occurs in the absence of treatment and what would occur with a new therapy. This, the intent is to find something that's sensitive to change. So if you have a relatively stable measurement, oftentimes in retinitis pigmentosa, central visual acuity may be quite stable for many, many years. So central visual acuity is probably not a very good sensitive measure for a clinical trial in RP, but we want to find other measures that do show some change over time. So that's what a natural history study is all about.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple more questions in the chat.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Is there a kind of clinical trial going on in the Netherlands for CRB1?
I'm not aware of a clinical trial, but I will say that oftentimes, as Todd is describing, if there's a natural history study where there is that is ongoing, then it would fall underneath, it's a clinical study, but it'll fall underneath a clinical trial, if you will. So I'm not sure perhaps if that is what is been meant by that, because I do know that the researchers and clinicians in the Netherlands have a large, and really throughout Europe, a very large clinical cohort of CRB1 patients. And I see a question from Sandy with regards to using skin from patients. And so one type of cellular model to understand disease is using human-derived induced pluripotent stem cells. And so by using either fibroblasts or skin cells, then researchers are able to create basically disease in a dish. So they use these in order to understand how the disease manifests within humans, within a human variant or mutation. So there are researchers that have been using human iPS-derived retinas to get a better understanding of disease phenotypes and understanding CRB1 and the different variants. So that is a fairly new research technique, but has proven to be very informative to understanding disease and the disease pathology.
I see 2 questions in the chat from Caroline. The first is it likely that there will be further follow-up and updates to the CRB1 community here about progress with any research?
So we will certainly continue to work with the research community. There was a lot of interest in maintaining the conversation. And so as those research updates are provided, the foundation always, provides updates, as does Sophia Sees Hope.
Right. And then the second question is, what pre-research steps led to the RPE65 Luxturna treatment? Specifically, was a natural history study done for the RPE65 community, which led to the breakthroughs?
Yeah, so the slide that I put up earlier with regards to the path to development. So all the way from understanding what is the gene mutation, so actually identifying that mutations in the RPE65 gene, which was back in the early 90s, that researchers identified that, all the way through understanding exactly the mechanism of disease, looking in various animal models, being able to translate that into identifying patients and patient populations and understanding the natural history. So several groups were assessing an RPE65 specific patient population in order to begin enrollments in clinical trials, and then moving through the various phases of clinical trials to enroll patients with that specific gene mutation. So the short answer is yes, it's the same process that would be needed here that was used for RPE65. Thanks for that.
Thank you. So Joseph Smith has his hand up again. I'm going to click allow to talk. You can go ahead.
I have a very basic question. I happen to be 76 years old, and yes, I have LCA in this particular gene. But of course, over the years, eye doctors had no idea what was going on. I was fortunate enough to be living in Baltimore when I was in my 30s and was able to get a diagnosis at Wilmer. I now live in South Florida, and I do see a retinal specialist at Baskin Palmer. So I'm very lucky that I have someone, and I go, nothing can be done for me, but I go, so he has research and stuff that he spreads on. He's also a professor, so he talks to students about it. But my question is kind of going back to, I think, Denise's question of where do you go to get information? Does the average ophthalmologist now, do they really learn about this? Or do you have to be lucky like I am to be near a teaching hospital that has expertise?
That's a very good question. And I am actually going to see if I can put on the spot one of our in-house experts on working with our patient community and educating them. Ben Shaverman, would you like to chime in on this question?
No.
Sure.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thanks. So I think your name was Joe. I think your observation is a good one. And it really does help when you have an inherited retinal degeneration, like something caused by CRB1 mutations, to go to an academic research center like Hopkins or Shea Eye Institute or Mass Eye and Ear to get a good workup to really understand what's going on. Your average private practice eye care professional is not usually all that familiar with these conditions. There are exceptions to that. On the foundation's website, we do have a list of retina doctors that see patients with inherited retinal diseases. And many of these, I would say, are somewhat or very expert in these conditions and would be a good place to go. Not all, but many are. For anybody who wants some help in trying to find somebody that may be convenient to them, they can send an email to info@fightingblindness.org and we'll try to help. I would consult that list on our website first, but feel free to reach out to us and we'll try to help you find somebody who is knowledgeable about these conditions.
Thank you, but I think the problem is still going to be the average person, parent knows their child's having a problem and they'll see an ophthalmologist or an optometrist who really isn't sure what to do to start off with,
I agree, that's a challenge, and it's the challenge can be addressed in two different ways. One is obviously the family advocating for their loved one and reaching beyond their local ophthalmologist. The other thing that I'll add is I'm part of a small team at the Foundation Fighting Blindness that is working to educate eye care professionals throughout the US about these conditions and the resources available to patients. We are a small team. It's a big country, so there's a lot of work to do, but we do offer a number of activities to bring in the private practice community into our space. One thing I'll add, not to make this explanation too long, but the advent of Luxturna has really changed things for our space. Even though Luxturna is only for RPE65 mutations, it's really brought awareness to the whole inherited retinal disease community. So I will say that more and more eye care professionals who weren't really interested in our space are at least becoming aware that things are happening, that we have an FDA-approved therapy. So as more clinical trials get off the ground and hopefully we get more FDA-approved therapies across the finish line, that will all improve. But I guess my last comment is these are rare conditions. The average eye care professional doesn't see a lot of people with inherited retinal diseases. So that's part of the challenge.
Thank you.
Amy, I wanted to just acknowledge that we're coming in close to the hour, and I know some of us, we do have other appointments, but also want to recognize that there are still a number of questions in the text box. Leila, will it be possible for us to type up some brief responses to these and send those out to those folks who've registered for this webinar?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so that's what we'll do. And there's a final question down here from Caroline in the text box. Were any specific actions taken away from last week's workshop? We got a lot of great ideas last week. The workshop wasn't probably the ideal opportunity to vet the ideas and figure out what's the best way to go. From the foundation's side, we have a team who's convening a meeting in the next week or two to evaluate some of those options are. As Amy alluded to earlier, you are very intrigued by the possibility of conducting a natural history study to better understand the relationship between genotype and phenotype. We think that's going to be very important going forward. However, the therapeutic pipeline evolves, but we have other options we want to consider. So I wanted to add that note before I continue. And I'll turn it back over to Laura.
Thank you, Todd. And so a quick note on this slide, there will be a published landscape document following the workshops that we did. And we're also hoping that there will be a peer-reviewed document published by the Foundation Fighting Blindness as well. So that would be very important to, again, bringing more awareness, bringing more folks together to help move this forward. And Todd, if you could flip to the next slide, thanks. All right, so, there was a lot discussed, and I think, as I said up front, right, there's no easy answer, there's no direct answer. I know because I'm waiting for the same thing for my daughter. We just want to know what we have to do to get to treatments. And this gene in particular is complex. So the great news is that the discussion is happening. Instead of having multiple conversations one-on-one, that workshop brought everyone together so we could have the conversation at one time. We could publish something that then will bring attention to it, bring more awareness about all of it. So all of this really makes a huge difference. I know it might not seem like a lot when we're sitting here waiting for treatments for ourselves and for our children and watching what they're going through, but it really does. And I am really excited and encouraged by everything that's happened and how the community's come together. So what we can do as a community is, I would advocate that please do maintain My Retina Tracker profile, no matter where you are in the world, right? The more folks that we can show that are identified with this genetic variant, again, the more it raises interest, awareness, and support for research here. I think we've said a few times, right? Follow that Foundation Fighting Blindness. You can follow Sophia Sees Hope, right? We're trying to stay on top of all of the information. And then continue to grow and support one another. So Joe, thank you so much for that comment at the end. And Ben talked about what the foundation's doing to really to educate clinicians, right? But one of the things that we can do as well is to inform, support, and educate ourselves. It seems like, again, not a great answer, but it really is. This is a grassroots effort to some extent, right? We're rare disease, so you can walk into many offices and doctors' offices and they don't really know what to tell us unless you're lucky enough to be able to go to one of these centers, right? So the way that we can support is connecting, sharing stories, supporting the community. Obviously, there's a lot going on in social media, but then there's also organizations like the Foundation Fighting Blindness, Sophia Sees Hope. And then the wonderful thing about this community is that there are some very strong CRB1 groups. Some of the genetic variants don't have groups at all. This group is very lucky that you do have some really good patient advocacy organizations and leaders in the community. So the CRB1 network is a relatively new Facebook group. Laura Fietta, thank you so much for starting this. It's meant to sort of be a global, no matter where you live, join here for information sharing. Many of you may know Kristen Smedley, and there's the Cure Retinal Blindness Foundation, which is a very strong foundation that a lot of folks are familiar with and has done a lot to raise funds as well. Many people in this community also I know are very active raising funds, so thank you. And then finally, through this work, we learned about the Grupo España y Latinoamérica. So gracias a Miguel Ruiz, muchas gracias, because there is also a very strong community of Spanish speakers that I was not aware of before this. So this is really, really great. So that's my soapbox. I will stop talking. But thank you everyone for your participation. We will follow up with an email that will have the recording from today, a link to the survey if you did not get a chance to participate in that, and any other resources that we can think of before we send it out. And you'll of course also have my email here and Todd's as well. So with that said, thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Leila and Amy and Todd and Ben and all of you for your questions and support.
And thank you, Laura. It's been great working with you on this.
Thanks. All right, take care. Bye, everyone.